Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, big wins for Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are overshadowed by long lines at presidential primary voting places. And we'll hear what state lawmakers had to say about those long lines in our weekly legislative update. Those stories next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. Maricopa County Recorder Helen Purcell says that bad decisions are to blame for long lines at many Maricopa County polling places during yesterday's presidential preference election. Lines that resulted in voters waiting for hours and in some cases as late as midnight to cast a ballot. Purcell says that she takes responsibility for advising the county to drastically cut the number of polling places as a cost-saving measure, and that she didn't anticipate so many independents attempting to vote, along with those who chose to vote in person as opposed to by mail. Purcell also says that she will not resign. Now, Governor Doug Ducey said today that it's, quote, unacceptable that Arizonans had to wait so long to vote yesterday. He also said that the law needs to be changed to allow independents to vote in presidential primary elections. And Phoenix Mayor Greg Stanton has called on the U.S. Justice Department to look into yesterday's voting problems. Stanton called the situation a, quote, fiasco and noted that Phoenix had a disproportionately smaller number of polling places compared to more Anglo-dominated suburbs, including Paradise Valley and Fountain Hills. As for the election itself, Republican Donald Trump and Democrat Hillary Clinton wound up with convincing wins, and here now to analyze and review the results are political consultants Stan Barnes and John Laredo. Good to have you both here. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
Trump, Clinton, big wins, big surprise?
No, none among us insiders, right? No, it wasn't a surprise. All the polling had said this is the way it was going to turn out. The surprise for me, I guess, if you drill down the next level, it was that Bernie Sanders spent a lot of time in Arizona and a lot of money and didn't break 40%, which I think is an interesting phenomenon. I'll let my Democratic friend explain maybe why that is. But other than that, Donald Trump won 14 out of 15 counties. I think he lost Graham County. Is the only county.
Interesting.
And so no surprise.
We'll get to Trump in a second. Let's get to Clinton and Sanders here. Sanders did make a very strong push late. Why did he do that, and what happened?
Well, I think Arizona has a later primary, and I think that heading into the primary here in Arizona, there was a feeling that this actually will play out longer than maybe some people thought it would. And so he did make a big push here. Clinton did the same thing. But this has always been a very kind of a pro-Clinton state. President Bill Clinton won the state twice. They've just got kind of great support here in Arizona, so it wasn't too big of a surprise.
Sounds like women and minorities were big for Clinton. Make sense?
Yeah, I think so, but we don't really know any data from the county at this point, so it's kind of hard to tell. It looks as if relatively the same number of people who voted in 2012 voted this year as well. And so there shouldn't have been any big surprises from anyone looking at the data.
As far as Trump is concerned, did Republicans vote for Trump or against the field?
I think more for Trump. I think Trump got just under 50%, 46, 47%, and I think that was a pro-Trump vote. You might say there's some statistical backing to that, because a lot of votes were for candidates that are no longer in the race,
right,
because people mailed in a Rubio vote and it just had a null effect. So I think Trump earned his 46 or 47%, and the 58 delegates helped ensure that he's actually going to get to the requisite number before Cleveland when the convention happens.
And we're looking at the results here. Trump at 47, Cruz at 25, Rubio no longer in the race at 13. John Kasich, who does seem like the moderate's choice, and Arizona does have a contingent of folks who are center-right as opposed to far-right. What happened to, he didn't even try here,
Well,
did he?
I think the moderates turned out and voted, both of them. I think they were both at the bottom. That's a bad joke. No, I think Kasich surrendered Arizona based on the swallowing of the Republican Party by the movement that is Donald Trump and the echo movement of Ted Cruz. I mean, both those guys are counterinsurgency, one farther outside the circle of power than the other, and they just swallow up most of the vote, and it didn't take too much intelligence and polling to see Kasich had to spend his money somewhere else.
Right.
He didn't have all the dollars in the world. He needed to prioritize.
As far as the Democrats are concerned, it's pragmatist. Was this a pragmatist vote here? That Clinton is the best chance to win, thus Clinton gets our vote?
I don't think so. I think it's hard to tell. That Bernie does have a lot of grassroots support here. But there were big pushes at the very end, not a whole lot of campaigning beforehand. I think that, I suspect that both camps probably thought that it would be a little clearer who the overall winner would be by now. And so typically Arizona is later in the primary, and so you don't get a whole lot of attention. Yeah.
Did anything happen Tuesday that makes you think that Hillary Clinton can take Arizona in the general?
Yes.
Talk to us.
Donald Trump won. Donald Trump is winning. I think if Donald Trump is the nominee, I think you'll see Clinton, if she's a nominee, take Arizona. I think that really changes the dynamic here and puts Arizona in play, especially when you look at what support Trump has with Latinos and young voters in particular, and women. It is not good for Donald at all. They are through the roof for anybody but Donald, and that puts Arizona in play.
You agree with that?
Not necessarily, no. I hadn't actually thought about Arizona in a Hillary versus Donald race. This campaign has told us consultant types that the rule book we've been following no longer applies. We're like old generals fighting the war from last time instead of this time. And so I'm going to have to put that through the filter. Trump is going to do things that no other Republican normally does. He's going to get more of the African American vote, for instance, than a normal Republican does. We don't have a lot of that in Arizona. But I think the anti-Trump thing outside of the Republican Party is greatly exaggerated. I think it's so hard to predict where an independent guy, he really is an independent, running in the Republican apparatus, and where will he go with that vote? And Hillary's negatives, how will they play? It's really hard to say.
Regarding those negatives and the idea that Trump is such a wild card, not such a wild card though with older white male Reagan Democrats, call them what you will, they are flocking to Donald Trump, and some of these folks cannot stand Hillary Clinton. It's an interesting balance there, is it not?
They're in the minority in the American electorate and shrinking rapidly. You look at minorities, you look at women voters of all stripes. Donald Trump does not do good with Republican women. They are the biggest section of the voters in Arizona are women voters. That does not swing Donald Trump's way. That swings against him, and I don't think there's been any candidate that I can ever remember that has been so unbelievably offensive towards such a broad range of voters. You can't undo that. Once it's done, it's done.
Yeah, well, and not only that, I don't know of anyone I can't think of a range of. He even says he loves the low information. He likes the lower educated folks.
That's right.
I don't know who he has not insulted. How do you explain his success?
Yeah, that's part of that rule book tearing up analogy I was making. The guy attacks George W. Bush on the eve of the South Carolina primary and then clobbers it in the South Carolina primary. And in addition to all the other things, it's impossible to explain other than, I'll give you this attempt. The fed up level that we always talk about in elections is so palpably real that the Cruz-Trump universe is far and away most of the Republican voting electorate, and Trump is getting a lot of independent people out. The phenomenon of higher turnout is real with Donald Trump.
Yes.
What does that mean in the general election? I'm not sure.
Well, and real quickly, back to Trump again, we have E.J. Dionne, the course with the national columnist there for the Washington Post. We had him on. He's got a new book out, How the Right Went Wrong, talking about conservatism and the problems right now. He's saying what's happening out there, and a big reason for Trump is that for years, the Republicans have courted the far right, those folks that are just simply angry at everyone, to get off my lawn contingent. They've promised the moon, they've delivered very little. Those folks are angry, and not just now at Democrats, but they are angry at establishment Republicans for failing to deliver. Is that a valid point?
Yeah, it's a valid point. Yeah, I think it's inaccurate. I mean, EJ is a great thinker, but I don't trust him to do this analysis for us. My own analysis is the Democrats are making a living out of defending poor people and even the undocumented, and that's what they talk about all the time. And the Republicans, my own party, it can be said that they end up in bed with Wall Street and big pharma and big insurance and big everything else. And there's a giant swath of middle America that keeps this country going that feels like neither party is doing it for them. And Trump is right there. As I say, I think he's an independent running in the Republican apparatus.
You think he's an independent running
But,
Republican?
no, look, I'm not sure what he is, and I'm not sure he knows either, or anybody else. But Democrats are talking about the economy here. And this, that's what the issue is going to be about. And that is Donald Trump's weakness is the economy and how he does in business. And he may do very well in Republican primaries where you have a much smaller, more extreme Republican primary. Those group of voters may be big enough to win a primary, but they are not big enough to win a general election.
And as far as the Democrats are concerned, Sanders, again, in Arizona, we saw the numbers. It was a pretty convincing win for Hillary Clinton. Is he too extreme for Arizona Democrats?
No, look, I think for most voters, they probably have not heard of Bernie Sanders before this election. Maybe some really dyed-in-the-wool Democrats have. I knew who he was. But for the most part, people know who Hillary Clinton is. And so you can't discount name ID. And although she may be popular with that smaller group of really conservative Republican primary voters, she does have popularity outside of that.
So she wins big, Donald Trump wins big. Last question regarding Trump. I find the whole thing very fascinating. Republican establishment, do they understand what's going on here? I mean, they have literally, there's a disconnect between Republican establishment and Republican voters. It's quite clear.
Yeah.
Do they get that?
Yeah, they're getting it reluctantly now. Although it's my negative opinion that if Trump gets the requisite number to be the nominee, he will be the nominee. But a big faction of the money and the conservative pointy heads will actually run their own candidate in the name of giving them somebody to vote for. They can't vote for Hillary, they can't vote for Trump, and they can't not vote because that's an abdication. So I'm afraid we're going to get three people running for president in the general election no matter what scenario you come up with. Even if Trump doesn't get the requisite number, then he's not the nominee. The nominee is somebody else, and Trump runs as an independent.
And the far outside theory is if you get one of those third-party candidates or one of those third candidates that can take a state or two away from Hillary Clinton, no one gets 270 electoral votes. It goes back to the House of Representatives. You've got a Republican president.
A third-party candidate is not going to take votes away from Hillary Clinton. It's going to take away votes from Trump.
So you don't think that's viable at all?
No.
All right. Before
Those are the kinds of things that are being talked about this year. That we've had this happen before. It was 200 years ago, but yeah, it could actually go to the House of Representatives.
We got all of about a couple minutes, 1.5, something minutes here left. What happened yesterday at these polling places?
We learned that the county recorders of Arizona are very important people, and decisions they make have real impact on voters. I'm sure Helen Purcell, who's a gracious woman who's served this county very well, being Maricopa County, is having the worst day of her life, given the decision she made previous that she could shrink the polling places down. What a bad decision. What a bad decision. And now she's facing an election and calls for a resignation. I think that's all it is a calculation about saving money and an estimate about who's going to turn out, and voila, it was wrong, and now people are mad.
Was it just a bad decision?
She knew better, and everyone did. She went to the Board of Supervisors in February, and there was concern expressed on the board. Steve Gallardo said that 60 polling places was way too small a number, and predicted exactly what would happen, and he was completely disregarded, and they went full steam ahead. They knew better. They knew what was going to happen here. And you have to remember, the county elections officials are floating bills at the state capitol to turn our elections completely into mail-in ballots. I think you've probably seen their election after election, they dwindle the number of polling places in spite of turnout going higher and higher and higher. I think they do that to try to change voting behavior and force people onto early ballots, and it's wrong.
I really don't.
And it's predictable. They have been lowering the number of polling places election after election after election. Problems at the polling places go back over and over and over. This is nothing new, and it was completely predictable. And every cycle, the press and everybody else gets shocked that it happened yet again, and there were less polling places. 200 polling places the last presidential primary, 60 this time. You had legislative districts in the West Valley, legislative district 29, 30, and 20. They had 21 polling places during the last presidential primary election. They had 2 this time. Tell me that you can go from 21 to 2 and not expect to have any problems at all.
I don't believe it's a conspiracy. I think it was a really dumb decision by an elected official who's in charge of this type of thing. Other counties did not have this trouble. It was a Maricopa County decision, and Helen Purcell bears the brunt of it. Too bad.
Last point, last word on this. Conspiracy?
I think, no, really bad decisions is what it is, and bad political calculations. But the ramifications here is that these issues are going to the Department of Justice. Arizona, a couple of years ago, lost their Section 5 preclearance. Section 5 still exists. You have to requalify by showing a pattern of abuse here. And this is a glaring one. You couple this with the ballot collection bill and all of the other things that they've done, I predict that DOJ is going to level the hammer at Arizona. They've got them dead to rights, and the end result of this is going to be another Section 5 for Arizona eventually.
All right, we got to stop it right there. My goodness, great conversation. Good to have you both here. Thanks for joining us.
Get the inside scoop on what's happening at Arizona PBS. Become an insider. You'll receive weekly updates on the most anticipated upcoming programs and events. Get the insider delivered to your email inbox. Visit azpbs.org to sign up today.
State lawmakers are planning a hearing on yesterday's long voting lines, and areas of the House were taken over by activists today. Here to talk about that in our weekly legislative update is Hank Stevenson from the Arizona Capital-Times. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me on.
Busy times, and what's this business of protest happening inside the House? What happened here?
Well, it was actually at the Capitol complex, kind of the compound around the House, Senate, the governor's office.
Okay.
But the House was the only one to actually lock their doors, put out security guards, and actually start kind of wanding people for metal and restrict entry into the chamber. This was all over, 100, maybe 200 protesters, same people who shut down the road to Trump last weekend. So I think that kind of had them spooked. They said that they were a little bit worried about the attack in Brussels earlier in the week, which doesn't really connect to most people, I think. But basically the chamber started wanting people, checking it out, making sure that nobody was coming or going who shouldn't be there. But this is the people's house. This is a public building that we all pay for and should have relatively unrestricted access to. So it was very strange for the House to put up the security that they did. And very telling that the Senate didn't bother to do the same thing.
I was going to ask, no reciprocation?
No, nothing from the Senate, just normal business day for them.
So again, this was basically at the complex down there, not necessarily inside the House, not inside. But were these protesters, were they protesting the long lines? Were they protesting Trump? What were they protesting?
It was a little bit of all of the above. There were some big Trump mannequins out there. It was a lot of Stop the Hate, No More SB 1070-like bills. It was a lot of the Latino Get Out the Vote groups, I think, who have a myriad of issues that they're frustrated over. And Trump being the big target of the day was kind of the top of the list there.
Well, a lot of folks were frustrated yesterday over those long long lines at polling places. Lawmakers, scheduling a hearing next week? What's this all about?
Yeah, the House House Elections Committee will hold a hearing next week to kind of flush out some of these issues. I think that the Secretary of State will be meeting with some of the county recorders to do the same. Every elected official in the state right now is going to be sitting down with their top staffers and trying to come up with the list of reasons that it was such an unmitigated disaster.
But we should note that it was an unmitigated disaster in Maricopa County. Did we hear of any problems elsewhere around the state?
No, nothing even coming close to the degree of problems that we had here in Maricopa County.
Now, Maricopa County and all the counties, I think the last budget, there was some cuts to election procedures through the counties, correct?
Yeah, there have been cuts last year, over the years. I mean, we're moving more and more as a society towards early voting, mailing in your ballot. I think that the county recorders were a little bit too or specifically our county recorder, Helen Purcell, was far too optimistic on their calculations of how many people would be voting by mail. Probably didn't see the increase or didn't expect the increase that they actually saw from newcomers to presidential primary elections, the Trump supporters, essentially, the Bernie Sanders supporters who may have just registered in order to go out and vote for those people. A confluence of different issues just kind of hitting at once and just creating a disaster like we've never seen before.
And we should mention Helen Purcell didn't help matters any by initially kind of blaming voters.
Blaming
for
independent
the
voters who shouldn't have been there in line to cast ballots
But does she have a point there? Should they have been in line?
No. Well, I mean, every person has the right to request a ballot, whether that ballot will be counted or not. And I think to some degree, and it's up for debate how prevalent this was. It might be a bit of a red herring. But they're not able to vote. Those ballots will not be counted. So, kind of what's the point? And if you're 10 people in the line slowing it down, then maybe they shouldn't be there.
And we also heard reports that some folks who registered Democrat, who registered Republican, they finally get up there to vote and the rolls say you're an independent. And so there's the provisional aspect, put you out of line, the whole night. I mean, it just seemed like everything was wrong.
Yeah, it was amazing. I don't think you've probably ever seen anything like that. I certainly haven't in my lifetime. I mean, when the races are called at 8:30-ish, and you're still waiting in line to vote at 12:30 at night after the polls have closed at 7, something is hugely wrong there.
So next week, Helen Purcell and Secretary of State Michelle Reagan will be testifying?
I would imagine so. I don't think that that's been laid out yet, but if they're not there, I'm sure people will be wondering why not.
And the governor calls for independents to be able to vote in the presidential preference election. Is that likely to happen?
No, it is not. Not through the legislature. The legislature is actually moving the opposite direction of making them the presidential primary elections more controlled by the parties, maybe going into a caucus mode, having the parties pay for them themselves as opposed to voters or citizens paying for it, because that is somewhat inherently unfair that independents are required to fork over their tax dollars to pay for this election and yet cannot cast a vote unless they join up with one of the parties. So that coming out of the legislature, I can't even imagine that happening. I thought it was fascinating that Ducey called for it, though. We've got 4 years to work on this until the next time. Maybe things will change by then, but the current legislature is not going to do that.
Yeah, it was an interesting statement. All right, Hank, good stuff. Good
Thanks
to
for
have you.
having me on.
Thanks for joining. And former baseball major leaguer and broadcaster Joe Garagiola Sr. passed away today at the age of 90. Garagiola was a catcher in the major leagues for 9 seasons and grew up in St. Louis across the street from Yogi Berra. Garagiola went on to a long and celebrated career as a baseball broadcaster. He also hosted game shows and filled in for Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show. Garagiola later worked as part of the Diamondbacks broadcast team for many years. Back in 2008, Joe Garagiola appeared here on Arizona Horizon, and we talked about a number of things, including his love for Arizona.
If I had to use one word, it's a people state. They care about each other. And then that's what life is all about, if I can get a little bit philosophical. We have to keep each other warm. You have to help me. Down at the reservation with my kids, and you know what I'm doing down there, we have a prayer I got out of Guidepost, Ted, and it's very simple. Teach me, Lord, to know that every day, down every street, there's a chance for me to be God's hands and feet. And in Arizona, I find a lot of people. This is a very charitable town. In fact, I kid about it. I've never seen a town with so many charitable banquets. I mean, and they're all good causes. I tell people, if you got a rotten cause, I'm coming, man.
When people see you, they see someone who's up, who's just charged and ready for life. What gets you up in the morning and what keeps you happy when you go to bed at night?
Well, you know, I guess I live by it. What's the sense of me telling you how bad I feel? Number one, most people are glad that you feel bad, and the other half, they don't really care. I don't know how to answer that question, but I tell you, if I had a choice between smiling and growling, I'll take the smile.
Joe Garagiola dead at the age of 90. That's it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.